It's been a week of a lot of numbers as you were listening to the finance minister presenting his budget this week. As you heard, there are some sectors suggesting it's rather anti-poor, pro-solar. Well, let's unpack some of the key takeouts from this year's budget speech, which some are saying was completely separate to what the president had in mind. Joined by Chen Tseng, who is the acting CEO of the Financial and Fiscal Commission. Chen, good morning to you. I appreciate your time. And while we have this discussion, tell me, as someone who doesn't work in the financial sector, I can't imagine we can talk about the budget speech without talking about the grey listing. Are we seeing an effect between the two? How concerning would that be for you? Good morning.
Good morning, Gareth, and good morning to your viewers. With regards to particularly the grey listing, I think what is being important to note is that these decisions and judgments by this international institute for the Financial Action Task Force is not taken sort of on the legislation of one country alone. It's actually in view of the international community, the current global affairs dynamics, financial trajectories, trade relations, and international politics. And the impact thereof, of course, it's a signal sent out to the global community as a whole. I think, so in that vein, it's worth noting that in the same announcement to grey list South Africa, FATF suspended its membership of the Russian Federation for the illegal, unprovoked, and unjustified full-scale military invasion of Ukraine. So I think these factors ought to be taken into account in view to understand the meaning and the impact of this decision.
So give us a sense then, overall, if you could, about your takeaways from the budget speech, because I imagine if we're talking fiscally, bringing down the fiscal deficit without having to increase taxes would translate to good news for most of us taxpayers, isn't it?
Yes, so I don't necessarily agree with the Institute for Economic Justice that is an anti-poor budget. In fact, as you said, looking at both the expenditure part as well as the tax part or the revenue parts, it all seems rather in line in trying, at least on the just balancing the balancing act between expenditure and revenue. It does seem to be rather taking into cognizance of the situation of the poor. For example, the tax is not moved, and with a lot of tax relief for the households and businesses that are battered by, of course, the rolling blackout. But also remember, there was just the COVID-19, there was civil unrest, there's natural disasters. I think what what concerns us as the Financial and Fiscal Commission is on particularly the Eskom debt relief bill, and it is the impact and the absorption of essentially this hundreds of billions of debt right onto the fiscus and right onto the debt portfolio of government. And with yes, the conditions are there. But remember, in 2019, a similar approach, identical approach, was implemented only through Department of Public Enterprises and Minister. And one wonders now, 5 years later, are we doing still the same thing? And also, therefore, raise doubts as to what kind of a different impact by adopting the same approach.
Yeah, it's going to be an issue of division of revenue, isn't it? Because right now, some suggesting that this budget is very pro-middle class, pro-rich, and very anti-poor. What did you make of the division of revenue? You've got to bring in, for example, social grants, and let's not forget as well, a large whack of that budget, of our budget, is actually going off to paying off debt, isn't it?
Yeah, so for provinces, some interesting development is put in place, albeit still a lot of details that still need to be worked out. For example, the pledging of the conditional grants for provinces, I think it could be a very useful incentive as well as leveraging mechanism. For local governments, there have been strong growths in terms of the local government equivalent share. And also specifically 8 billion is given for the basic components of LGES. I think for all these, from SRD, from and also division of revenue towards the subnational spheres of government. What's important thing to recognize, especially for budget, and notice the word, the budget. What that means is that we are planning to spend money that we are yet to get or receive and collect. And that's how much we are planning on spending. But the real actual spending is still to take place, and the actual expenditure and the most importantly implementation and execution. For instance, earlier you mentioned SRD, but did anybody realize and notice that in the second the adjustment appropriation, there was a 3.7 billion reduction for SRD because there had been a slow but the National Treasury is arguing that it's improvements in the targeting mechanism or the means testing of the SRD. So I think these are so I think what is important to learn here ultimately is that budget is of course an allocation, right? It's a signal, it's an indication of what's going to happen. But let's not forget, most importantly, is what's actually going to happen.
And I don't think many people would disagree with you as well. It's one thing to have the money on paper. It's one thing to have the finance minister standing there and speaking about it. I suppose you have to implement this as well. Chen, just a last brief answer from you in my closing question, just regarding if you were going to a bride today and you're having a glass of wine before it gets more expensive, and someone asks you, Chen, as someone who knows the sector, knows the budget, would you say this was a good budget speech, or was this as good as we could have hoped for?
Right. So personally, I don't drink much because I got Oriental flush. So one sip and I'm down. But I'd say for the budget, it hits various notes here and there. Like, for example, as a commission, we appreciate the adoption of its recommendation made in previous budget submissions to lower and maintain tax policy consistency. This is, of course, to help households and businesses, but also to let the system recover and improve efficiency. We have to let the system do that. But I think on various other aspects, especially, as I said, on the expenditure side, implementation and execution, it's still waiting to be realized. And I think, as we can all agree, load shedding and others, all the Minister of Finance can do at the moment is to throw money at it. But the real transformation or reforms and implementation and changing execution, I think we don't see that, unfortunately, in the budget. And one doubts whether that can be seen in the budget.
Yeah, that's, I think, what many people are thinking as well. There's a lot that still is left to be desired. Chen, thank you very much. What a pleasure talking to you, and I appreciate your time. Hopefully we'll talk again. Wonderful insight from a fiscal perspective. Chen Tseng, acting CEO of the Financial and Fiscal Commission as well, as he quite rightly says. Not much of a wine man. I don't think many of us will be when the sin taxes kick in later this year.